I controlled other people's lives. I had that power to control. After I didn't get caught for the first 15, I thought it was my right. I appointed myself judge, prosecutor, and jury, so I played God.
This is what Donald Harvey wrote before he was prosecuted for over 30 murders. He claims to have murdered 87 people, but some estimates the number being over 130 deaths. He is a self-professed some named Angel of Death. We will be digging deep into the timeline of what made him snap.
And I gave him rat poison in his dessert. It was a green pistachio pudding. I was surprised that the rat poison had worked so fast.
Harvey was born on April 15, 1952, as the first of 3 siblings. When he was only 6 months old, his father fell asleep while holding him and accidentally dropped him on his head. Harvey did not appear to have been seriously injured by this, but his soft spot never closed. Harvey's parents had a poor relationship with each other, yet were described as loving and nurturing to their 3 children. He also received another head injury when he fell from the running board of a truck. Harvey's uncle Wayne was also known to have sexually abused Harvey whenever he visited his grandmother's house, abuse which included assisting in masturbating and oral sex. He was also paid to allow a neighbor of his, Dan Thomas, to sexually abuse him as well, things which presumably caused his homosexuality. In school, Harvey was described as a teacher's pet and got good grades, but was very quiet and antisocial and was teased as a result. In 1968, Harvey went on to high school, but grew bored of it and dropped out. He briefly secured a job at a factory plant but was laid off. After obtaining a GED, Harvey's mother called him to come back to his hometown to stay with his ailing grandfather, and he did. Harvey arrived at the Marymount Hospital in London. There, Harvey quickly became popular and well-liked by the staff there and eventually received a job there. It was here that Harvey's reign of terror would begin and last for nearly 20 years. In his personal life, Harvey had another sexual encounter and began a relationship with another man named James Paluzzo and was raped by a roommate named Randy White. Harvey primarily targeted patients at the hospitals he worked at, yet also killed other victims, usually people who made him paranoid or crossed him in some way. He usually killed them either by smothering them with a pillow or plastic bag, setting up their deaths to look like accidents, such as giving them faulty medical equipment, overdosing them on medication, etc., and mainly by using various poisons, usually cyanide or arsenic, which he usually injected through medical equipment or foods and drinks. Harvey committed his first confirmed murder on May 31, 1970. Harvey killed for the first time 2 weeks into his employment on May 30, 1970, the victim being an 88-year-old Logan Evans, who Harvey smothered with a pillow and a plastic bag, allegedly in a rage after he rubbed feces in Harvey's face. This was the start of the Mercy Killer. Next, he accidentally killed a man on May 31, 1970 named James Tyree. Donald used the wrong size catheter on him. Tyree let him proceed, but then yelled at him to take it out. Donald then used the heel of his hand to control him until he vomited blood and died. Harvey's first actual mercy kill was on June 22, 1970, which was a 42-year-old Elizabeth White, who he killed by cutting off her oxygen supply, supposedly because she told him she wanted to die and even heard her praying for death. On July 10, 1970, he killed Eugene McQueen by turning him on his stomach when he knew he wasn't supposed to. He drowned in his own fluids. Harvey informed the nurse that McQueen looked bad, but she said for him to continue. Therefore, he proceeded to bathe him after he was dead in order to avoid suspicion. This was covered up by the hospital. For as long as he worked at Marymount, the doctors and nurses teased him for bathing a dead man. On July 12, 1970, he accidentally killed Harvey Williams, 82, by using a faulty gas tank. He went into cardiac arrest and died. Then on July 24, 1970, he killed Ben Gilbert, 81. This was significant because it was his first premeditated murder. Ben had knocked Donald unconscious with a urinal and poured its contents over him, claiming that he thought Donald was a burglar. Harvey retaliated by catheterizing Gilbert using a female-sized number 20 catheter instead of the smaller number 18 for men. He then straightened out a coat hanger and shoved the wire through the catheter about 2 feet, puncturing his bladder and bowel. He went into instant shock, breaking into a cold sweat and going into a coma. Harvey disposed of the wire and replaced the number 20 catheter with the number 18. Harvey began a relationship with another man named Vernon Midden, who supposedly taught him a lot about how human bodies react to certain things, something which helped him in his murders. Midden was also supposedly an occultist. Vernon introduced Donald to the occult, but wouldn't let him take part in the rituals because he wasn't a member. This and other things made their relationship begin to sour, something which caused Harvey to become depressed and began fantasized about embalming Vernon alive. Their relationship lasted 7 months. On August 15, 1970, he then killed Maud Nichols using a faulty oxygen tank. She had been sent there with bed sores so bad that maggots crawled in the sores. No one wanted to give her care, so he killed her. It was then August 30, 1970, he killed William Bowling, 58, by not turning his oxygen on. He had been brought to the hospital due to difficulty breathing. Donald's action was intentional but spontaneous. He wanted to end the patient's struggles to breathe. William Bowling died of a massive heart attack. On 11-04-1970 killed Viola Reed-Wian, 63, using a faulty oxygen tank. He commented that she smelled bad. She was suffering from leukemia and electrolyte imbalance. He decided to end her suffering, so he attempted to kill her by plastic and pillow smothering, but someone came in and he had to stop. Therefore, he got the faulty oxygen tank and killed her that way. On December 7, 1970, he then killed Margaret Harrison, 91, by giving her an overdose of Demerol, morphine, and codeine that was intended for another patient. He monitored her pulse until it dropped to 0 and she stopped breathing. January 9, 1971 came around when he killed Sam Carroll, 80, using a faulty oxygen tank. He had pneumonia and an obstruction of his small intestine. Donald decided he had suffered enough and retrieved the faulty oxygen tank. January 15, 1971, is when he killed Maggie Rollins by smothering her with a pillow. He put a plastic bag between her face and a pillow in order to avoid fibers in her airways. She was treated for a bad burn on her arm. Then on January 26, 1971, he killed Silas Butner, 62, using another faulty oxygen tank. He had been experiencing kidney problems. He had attempted to kill him multiple times by smothering him, but each time was interrupted. There was an autopsy in this case, but the true cause of death was never discovered. On January 26, 1971, he killed John V. Combs, 68, using a faulty gas tank. He had a bad heart and difficulty breathing. Tried to smother him with a plastic bag unsuccessfully, so returned to the faulty oxygen tank. Donald described this killing as a mercy killing.
The patients may have had a month to 6 months to live, and they were mostly put there just to die. The families, instead of sending them to a nursing home, they put them there. Or if they had no family, the county or whatever would put them there. Those are a lot of the type patients that I terminated.
Then on March 14, 1971, he killed Milton Bryant Sasser, 90, by giving him an overdose of morphine that he had stolen from the cabinet at the nurse's station. He had been brought in for congestive heart failure. Donald made the mistake of trying to dispose of the hypodermic needle in a toilet, stopping it up. The maintenance man discovered the needle. However, no one recognized a connection between the needle and Sasser's death. On March 27, 1971 was his last day at Marymount Hospital. The reason is unknown, but then Harvey was arrested on March 31, 1971 for a burglary he committed while drunk. While under interrogation, a drunken Harvey babbled incoherently about his murders, but these were ultimately discarded and Harvey was only charged with petty theft, which he paid a fine for rather than serve prison time. Then on June 1971, he set a fire in the bathroom of an empty apartment in the building where he lived because he was depressed. This was an unsuccessful suicide attempt in which he tried to kill himself through asphyxiation. He was arrested and paid a $50 fine. Then it was time for his first heterosexual encounter with Ruth Ann Hodges, the daughter of a family he was staying with while in Frankfort, Kentucky, applying for a job. They were drunk, and he doesn't remember what happened, although he does remember being naked with her. 9 months later, she had a son in which she named Donald as the father. At times he has talked about his 2 children, but at other times he has denied they exist. He was arrested a short time later in 1971 for suspicion of burglary in his apartment building. The real reason for the arrest was to question Donald about the occult. Donald actually admitted to the police to killing 15 people at Marymount Hospital, but oddly no one believed him. On June 16, 1971 he enlisted in the Air Force. He also had sexual encounters with Jim. This was significant because Donald said he had an urge to kill Jim, but refrained because his deterrent was a fear of getting caught, not an aversion to killing. Plus he tried to commit suicide using an overdose of NyQuil because he was depressed. On March 9, 1972, he discharged from the Air Force. It was classified as medical reasons, under honorable conditions. The overdose of NyQuil led to the Air Force finding out about his arrest and resulted in therapy and ultimately his discharge. He then tried to commit suicide again, using Placidil and Equinol because he was depressed due to an argument with his family. He was taken to the hospital and his stomach was pumped. He was then transferred to the VA hospital as an inpatient when his parents told him he was no longer welcome at their house. He was then treated as an outpatient. He soon needed money as he became homeless. So he began working at Cardinal Hill Convalescent Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky. He worked there for 5 months full-time and another 2 years part-time. He oddly did not kill anyone while working there. 1972 to 1973, he began dating Russell Addison. They lived together and had a 10-month relationship. On September 23, 1975, obtained a job as a nursing assistant at the VA hospital in Lexington. And Donald reduced oxygen flow of Joseph Harris, possibly resulting in his death, although he was never indicted for this. On June 1977, Donald joined a cult through an initiation that is only available for heterosexual couples. Therefore, he was hooked up with Jan as his partner, and the two of them were initiated by switching partners with the couple already in the occult. This resulted in the conception of his second child. During this initiation, he received his spiritual guide, Duncan, that would assist him in figuring out who to kill. Duncan was a doctor during his lifetime. He then began dating Doug Hill. They heatedly argued often, and after one fight, Donald retaliated by slipping arsenic into Doug's ice cream. This was significant because it was the first person outside of the hospital he had tried to harm. Donald killed over 20 people throughout the 80s up until March 7, 1987. He killed John W. Powell, WM, 44, by giving him cyanide in his gastric feeding tube. An autopsy was performed that would change the destination of his fate.
My downfall was not leaving that day. I was in a hurry. And I put it through his G-tube. I knew it was a coroner's case. And he smelled something that smelled like bitter almonds. And he started running tests.
The autopsy for John Powell was conducted by Dr. Lee Lehman, a forensic psychologist who had a background in biochemistry, knowing specifically about cyanide. This meant that he knew exactly what cyanide smelled like and how to identify that smell. He cut open John Powell and immediately smelled the smell of bitter almonds, the smell of cyanide, and knew that foul play was afoot. He then proceeded with the autopsy and sent samples to other labs in order to confirm what he thought about cyanide. The 3 labs that he sent the samples to for confirmation confirmed what he had thought. The Cincinnati Police Department was notified shortly after. Investigations of John Powell's death began. First, his food supply was looked into. Then his wife was questioned. Nurses at the hospital were interviewed, and during one of these interviews, Donald Harvey's name was brought up because of his questionable ending of employment at the VA hospital. Hospital employees at this time were volunteering to take polygraph tests, and Donald volunteered to take one after buying a book on how to beat lie detector tests. He called in sick the day of his scheduled appointment and did not take the test. Since he did not take the test, Donald was brought in for questioning. Detectives Jim Lawson and Ron Camden questioned him for a while, playing a bit of good cop, bad cop, until finally Donald confessed to having put cyanide in John Powell's G-tube. He explained that it was because he felt sorry for him and for his family. He denied having ever done that for anyone else. But Donald was indicted for aggravated first-degree murder of John Powell. Soon after this, William Whalen was appointed his public defender. On August 18, 1987, 35-year-old nurse's aide, Donald Harvey, pled guilty to 24 counts of murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 1 count of felonious assault. 4 days later, he pled guilty to 25 murders, was subsequently sentenced to 4 consecutive 20 years to life sentences. Harvey was also fined $270,000. On September 7, 1987, in Kentucky, Harvey confessed to committing 12 additional murders while employed at Marymount Hospital. In November, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 8 life terms plus 20 years. He pled guilty a few months later for the 3 other deaths outside of the hospital, from which he received 3 life sentences plus 3 terms of 7 to 25 years. In total, Harvey was convicted of 37 murders, but some estimates place him at closer to 87. On March 30, 2017, Harvey died at age 64 in prison. Like his victims, he didn't die of natural causes. Prisoners beat the serial killer to death in his cell.
Prisoner James Elliott, who fatally beat the so-called Angel of Death, was sentenced to life in prison on Tuesday.